Hello, hello everyone, and good morning to the Taiwan attendees and participants, and also a little bit later, good evening to U.S. Participants and also other students and faculty in other part of the U.S. Let me introduce myself. My name is Carl Ho, and I am the co-host of the Data Analytics Colloquium, and my other co-host is Professor Peter Pan, and he is on the Taiwan side. If you are listening to this, I think you're joining us for the inaugural colloquium event for 2024. So I think this is the fifth year, and we are building an institution here. And before I introduce um, Professor Plebo Pinto here, and I want to double check with you now. This is um, organize and also broadcast using Teams. And if you're using the app, you should be able to get access to the chat, which is on you can on the top of the panel, you should see a chat icon, and so Q&A icon. You can use either one. I think Q&A will be more organized. You can get it moderated, and but you can feel free to type anything in the chat to ask a question, or you can unmute yourself and ask a question. And we are very open, and so we will get started and with Dr. Pinto's presentation. And okay, let me see if now the Q&A is ready, and and the chat is ready, and also it's being recorded, and you should be able to see the transcription here. All right, and now let me double check if Professor Pan is aboard, that I can introduce him. Let's see. He could be still on his way, and some of the students from UTD is joining, and some of the students from National Zhongxin University is joining. And all right, let me say welcome again to let me spotlight myself. Maybe I can get you to see me. All right. Okay, everybody can see me now. All right, I'm really excited and to introduce to you this first event of 2024, the Data Analytics Colloquium. And I want to introduce my good friend here, and also a really well-renowned scholar and scientist. And if you Google Plebo or just Pinto, his last name, you see a lot of his work, and particularly on EITM. When I first met with him, and I learned a great deal from him, and I was really very surprised. And some scholar can be so knowledgeable in both areas, and formal and empirical. And quickly, let me introduce a quick bio of Professor Pinto. He is the distinguished professor and director of the Center of Public Policy at the University of Houston Hobby School of Public Affairs. And we, in the previous talks, we invited Jim Granado, which is the dean of the school, and then we have Dr. Pinto, and working with oh, I have a phone coming in, and it could be all right, sorry. That is Professor Pan is calling me. All right, and so Dean Granado highly recommend me to invite Plebo, I call him Plebo, and I'm actually really excited that he accepted our invitation. And tonight he's going to give a presentation to us, and particularly interesting to IPD or International Political Economy students and trade, and also if you are interested in data science and EITM, and please wrap the question and maybe pose a question after the talk, and I will let Professor Pinto organize and answer the questions. in either regarding this talk or about methods or data science or the EITM. And he is actually very active in academic research. He's also very active in political methodology conferences. And he has now today, I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Pinto to give us his talk called Heterogeneous Districts, Interest in Trade Policy. Okay, I think I spent too much time. Without further ado, allow me to introduce Professor Pablo Pinto. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Carl. Thank you for
the floor is yours. Yeah.
Thank you for the kind introduction and for the invitation of being part of this colloquium. It's an honor to be able to present my research, and I have prepared a presentation. I will take probably between 45 minutes, maybe an hour. Sure. But if you need to interrupt anyone with questions and so on, I'll be happy to entertain them as much as I can. And again, it's going to be a dense presentation. I mean, because it's a combination of formal with empirics. I mean, it's like in the traditional we are used to in the EITM framework. It's not exactly an EITM project, but you'll see the similarities. And the key here for us is like we're really, I mean, it's like my colleagues, my co-authors and I are really excited about the whole agenda building from this project. And I'm going to cover some parts of it, but I'm happy to share the different papers that we've been producing in this dimension. So let me share a screen and we can start the presentation, and I'll try to go slowly and I will leave some stuff, I mean, for later for the discussion. I mean, it's like, because otherwise it's going to be too dense and I don't want to lose everyone along the way. So let me share screen and we'll get started. So 1 second, please.
Good.
I'm going to go to full screen and we'll get going. So thank you, Carl and Peter, for the invitation, and National Junction University and the University of Texas at Dallas. As Carl said, I'm Pablo Pinto. This is joint work with Kishore Gawande, who's at Macomb School at the University of Texas at Austin, and Santiago Pinto, who's a researcher at the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. So as you can see, there's already a caveat on the first, slide here, which is that since Santiago is at the Richmond Fed, we have to put this disclaimer that the views are not reflective of those of the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond or the Federal Reserve System. So let me get started. So this paper is called Heterogeneous Districts, Interest and Trade Politics, right? So the main motivation for the paper is building on the political economy of trade protection literature. I mean, it's like you might have heard of endogenous protection literature, which is an empirical literature that started in the 80s and moved forward. And there's new areas on the political economy dimension. I mean, it's like that. And now we're trying to bridge those two fields. I mean, it's like into identifying some theories that carry water on the empirical side. And this is a paper that we believe is doing that, right? So we have many contributions, both on the theoretical and the empirical side on this idea of endogenous tariff formation, right? The idea is that the tariffs have consequences on economic activity, and those consequences are internalized by actors, and those actors demand protection, and different political systems deliver that level of protection at different levels depending on incentives, institutions, interactions, and so on. And the combination between these two elements, the theory and empirics, has shown that there's influence of industry actors. I mean, it's like an interest, whether organized or not, voters, I mean, it's like of interest groups and so on. So that's a large body of literature looking into these. I mean, it's like in the past, it was called the endogenous tariff formation literature, and now it's the political economy of trade more, I mean, it's like broadly defined. So one of the canonical papers on the theory side of this is now the well-known protection for sale. The protection for sale literature started by Grossman and Heldman in 1994. It has, I mean, it's like its predecessors in other work. I mean, the political support function, literature by Hillman and others, right? But in the Grossman and Hillman, which is the canonical model that most people seem to have as a background on the political economy of trade, there's a centralized decision maker. I mean, usually, I mean, the president, or in the economic literature might be the welfare maximizing dictator that sits at the top of the polity, right? That chooses a policy, a trade policy, usually a tariff, to maximize a welfare function, omega, right? And the choice of omega is driven by two components: a W component, which is the aggregate welfare, and the second C component in the Grossman and Hillman, which is campaign contributions, right, or the influence of organized interests trying to push policy in their preferred direction, right? And the two are connected by this parameter, which in Grossman and Hillman is the A parameter, which is the weight that the decision maker places on the welfare of the whole economy, as opposed to the benefits to some individual members of the economy. Right? So if A is really large, which is what many empirical papers estimating these functions suggest, it means that buying protection is very expensive. Right? It's like the rate at which the policymaker trades off aggregate welfare to contributions by different groups. It's like is very low, right? It takes lots of contributions to get some movement away from aggregate welfare, right? And so that's the idea. There's a long literature trying to explain why that's the case. First, estimating this A parameter and trying to see which industries get protection based on their contributions. And this has led to it's like a large body of empirical work that tends to look at either, it's like through reduced form, using these formal and informal models, it's like estimate what are the drivers of protectionism across countries and within countries and over time. So that empirical literature has produced some regularities, right? So some papers have suggested that special interest matters. Others show that geography, the geographical location of industry and intersection with political geography matters, that institutions matter. Whether countries or whether policymakers are chosen through majoritarian or proportional representation electoral regimes, or democracies versus autocracies, or federal versus centralized governments, and so on. And more recently also, it's like whether or not it's all driven by firm productivity differentials, right? And the ability of some firms, the super performer firms, to be influential in policy making. So that's good. We advance, right? But our main concern, is that we don't find a very strong connection between theory and empirics, right? For those of you who saw, it's like Jim Granato's presentation on the EITM framework. What is lacking here is we are not able to advance our knowledge and understanding, produce knowledge in these agendas, because we don't all ascribe to the same theoretical framework. So we have different theories and new theories coming in, and different empirical constitutions. So we don't build knowledge that we do in other areas of the sciences, where you start with a paradigm, you start trying to figure out what's the empirical content of those theories, right? And try to do a back and forth between theory and empirics to advance our ability to analyze, and estimate relationships, right? So that's the first, reaction that we had when we were looking at this literature, where we thought we could contribute and hopefully become apparent what we're trying to do in that regard. The second one is that we tend to think about this centralized decision maker and the influence of different industries, right? But in most countries in the world, trade policy is not enacted by a welfare maximizing dictator. It's usually enacted in legislative bodies, right? And so those legislative bodies represent different types of interests, right? And so ultimately policies get passed when those interests reach a majority, or whatever is the threshold needed to pass the policies, right? That might not reflect, the supply side of policy making that a centralized decision maker framework would get us, right? And not only that, I mean, it's like, unfortunately, these type of mismatch between theory and empirics does not provide, in the case of the US, right? I mean, a clear explanation for some relevant empirical regularities. In particular, right? You might be familiar. I'm going to show you a picture in the next slide. In the case of the US, right, where we have regions like the Midwest, which were the industrial and manufacturing, I mean, it's like a powerhouse of this country, right? Were not sheltered from foreign competition or compensated to allow, I mean, it's like the actors producing manufacturers to adjust once the US economy opened up, I mean, it's like fully to trade, particularly from developing countries and China in particular. So if you look at that regularity, it's like historically, the party that tended to provide protection from World War II onwards in the US was the Democratic Party, and they tend to represent interests that were in import competing industries, in manufacturing in particular. And they were voting for Democrats, but over time, the Democrats were voting for liberalization and not reflecting the preferences of those individuals. And there was not compensation forthcoming for those. And that ultimately led to what we observed in the past 10, 15 years, a backlash against globalization, not only in the US, but also elsewhere in the world, right? And you might have seen that recently is a large body of literature in the US in particular, talking about the political fallout from the China shock that many attribute, I mean, it's like to the ability of a candidate like Donald Trump becoming competitive in areas that were traditionally dominated by Democratic policymakers, right? And again, another big, I mean, regularity that we cannot explain is these switches from protectionism to trade openness that we observed after the Great Depression in the 1930s. We passed the U.S. passes the infamous Smoot-Hawley, I mean, it's like a log roll tariff, I mean, it's like of the largest level of protectionism in the U.S. in 1931. And 3 years after that, I mean, it's like we have I mean, it's like wholesale liberalization through the passage of the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act in the U.S. in 1934 that led the way, I mean, it's like to this mechanism of reciprocal liberalization that was embedded in institutions like GATT, WTO, and other free trade agreements that the U.S. has entered, I mean, into over the past 80 years, and seems to be going away this day. And those frameworks about protection and so on cannot explain also, I mean, it's like, why are we moving back to protectionism these days, right? I mean, it's like, you might remember, I mean, the tariff wars on the 2017 and 2019, particularly between the US and China, but also US and other countries in the world that led, I mean, it's like to ramping up of tariffs and protection in the US market, this idea of onshoring and decoupling that many economies have started to experiment with in recent years, right? So this is the motivation for our paper, and hopefully, I mean, it's like as we move through and finish the presentation today, you'll get a sense of what our contributions are to these debates, right? But let me start with some, I mean, it's like a picture of what is traditionally looked at, I mean, it's like as the drivers of the demand for protection in the US, right? So this map shows, right, in darker colors, right, I mean, it's like a higher intensity of a congressional district share of total manufacturing in the US, right? And so the picture that you can observe is the one that you traditionally have in mind, right? So most manufacturing is in the Midwest area of the country. I mean, some areas of the South Atlantic, right? I mean, it's like, and we see some more, I mean, it's like on moving towards the West, right? And many other areas don't have high concentrations of manufacturing production historically, right? This is a picture for 2002, right? So the explanations that we have before would tell you that if industries are concentrated in the Midwest, there will be strong demand for protection coming from the Midwest, and any decision maker that tries to maximize them is like the well-being of the economy and being politically expedient will tend to cater to those interests. Because if you provide more protection to the Midwest, you might be able to get more votes, secure re-election, and even help you get the president elected through the Electoral College, right? So that's the traditional picture, right? By the end of the day, I'm going to try to show you, right? It's like, actually, it's like, well, we might be considering these, demand for protection is not reflected in the level of protection that those industries receive, and a very different political dynamic is at play. And so we can use our, theory and the empirical applications of our theory to explain, it's like who gets protected, it's like whose preferences are reflected in the level of protection or free trade that U.S. Has delivered. It's like in the era of globalization, right? So I'm going to talk later about a bit about the data where this comes from. But when you look at this map, it's slightly different from what you observe elsewhere, because most of the data in the U.S. about economic activity is collected at the county level, or it's like at the metropolitan statistical areas level, and we have converted that. It's like to data at the congressional district level, right? So the idea is that each congressional district is a unit that has approximately the same number of individuals, right? So it gives you a good sense of activity per capita, right? But also becomes important when we look at this a picture on how that it's like distribution of activity across congressional districts might get reflected, right, in a policy making process in the U.S. Okay.
Hello, Pepo. Pepo.
Yes.
Is it okay to interject? Sorry.
Sure.
Yeah. This is a very interesting distribution. This is in distribution by income or by volume. So how do you measure that in terms of that? Yeah.
This is just a ratio of manufacturing output, right?
Output
in the district.
All right.
And it's like over total manufacturing output in the country, right? So it's the share.
So that is measured by dollar or measured by proportion?
It's a ratio, so
by,
it doesn't matter. In the case from output, it comes from valued in dollars, but it's a ratio of district level to national level, so that the unit goes out, right? So it's just percentages.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So this tells you that.
Mentioned about the Midwest. Yeah, it looks like Arizona is having a lot of concentration. Maybe we can talk briefly about Arizona with so much coming from that area, and of course Washington is too. Yeah.
It's tricky too, right? When you think about it, it's like you have on the west, you have concentration places like Boeing. It's like areas around. It's like so. Now the issue here is these maps are tricky, right? Because it's like your typical map when you look at voting parties in the U.S. and you look at how the U.S. vote is spread based on parties, and you use red for Republicans and blue for Democrats, and so it looks like the whole country is red. But it doesn't reflect that. It's because geographically, right, places like Wyoming only have one congressional district, right? So it jumps out at you. That these are right. Or it's like in Arizona, it's only like you have those a limited number of congressional districts, so they jump at you. In other areas which are more populated in the Midwest, it's like in the Northeast and so on, there are more population per district, per state, so it tends to look, it's like more muted. But that's kind of the idea. But the point that you're making, Carl, is well taken. So there's some concentration in some areas, right? It's like and the issue that we want to make about this, right? It's like is that none of these districts can make policy by themselves, right? So they need to come together, right? So suppose you're a district, and this is gonna a giveaway of what's coming later on, right? Suppose you're a district in Washington and want to protect, it's like the output of Boeing and other industries, right? Now, if there's high concentration in that area, it means that there's not a lot of economic activity in that sector in other districts in the country, right? So that means that if you protect that district, you're hurting everybody else to benefit yourself. So you alone will not be able to pass policies, so you're less likely to get those policies enacted, right? It'll become apparent as we move along, but that's the intuition here, why just looking at concentration of economic activity might not be a good explanation why some districts are faring better in terms of what they get from the policies that are enacted, right? So this is a point, right? Okay, so that for us is key, right? I mean, it's like how are the dollars associated, I mean, it's like with increasing or decreasing, I mean, protection of some industries get distributed, I mean, it's like across different actors in different activities and across the country. So that's the idea. But this is just to motivate, right? I mean, it's like, so this gives you a typical picture, concentration of economic activity. I mean, it's like very strong in the Midwest, in the South Atlantic, and in parts of the West, and not much more going on, right? When you think about it. Okay, so let's move. I mean, it's like right about our contribution. So what do we do in this paper? But also, I mean, I'm going to speak about a couple of extensions we're doing in other papers, right? Is we develop a political economy model of trade, and depart from the Grossman and Heldman, we'll go with decentralized policymakers, right? So the idea is that there's a bunch of policymakers in the country representing different areas of the country, called them congressional districts, and they have to come together, right, in a legislature to amass a majority that would pass a series of tariffs. I mean, it's like that would be optimal for that majority, if not for the whole country, right? Okay, so what we have in the end, as I showed before, that districts are heterogeneous, right? For instance, manufacturing is unevenly distributed across the state, right? It's not that we are all producing all the goods in manufacturing across all districts, right? Some districts produce more of some goods than others, right? And some sectors, as I will show you in a second, right, are especially more concentrated than others, right? So furniture is more concentrated in areas, I mean, it's like in the South Atlantic, right? Steel used to be in the Rust Belt, the aerospace industry in the West, and so on and so forth, right? Okay, so that the idea is that, okay, we have representatives from districts. Districts are heterogeneous, right? We're going to exploit those differences to try to predict what the model would tell, who would want, I mean, it's like what type of protection to which industries, and then we're going to take that to the data. And we do this, I mean, it's like in stages, right? The first stage is, okay, let's start with a model that mimics Grossman and Heldman, but the main difference is now we have, right, decentralized decision makers as opposed to a centralized decision maker. In the paper, we show how, I mean, it's like you can think of the Grossman and Heldman as a folded version of our model, right? So our model is richer in that regard. So you have to fold in some specific ways our models, I mean, it's like to get to the prediction from Grossman and Heldman. So the idea is, but we start with a small country case. This small country case assumption is the idea that in most sectors, the US cannot exploit its size to affect prices. So for most sectors, for more goods, right, the US tends to be a price taker, right? And by being a price taker, right, the US, I mean, it's like takes world prices as given, right? That's the small country case, right? So in the small country case, if you want to protect one industry, you increase the, you add a tariff to the world price, right? And that gives you the domestic price, which is, I mean, it's like if you're protecting it, you're making it more expensive, right? And that results in some benefits to those producing those goods within the country and hurts consumers of those goods that are not producing it. And then we add, I mean, it's like one of the big innovations from the paper is adding this large country case assumption that allows us also to include not only import competing industries, but also exporters, right, and exporting industries, right, and terms of trade effects in the determination of trade policy. The terms of trade effect, for those who are familiar with that economics of trade, is this idea that by restricting the amounts of goods that you demand, when you increase the prices through restrictions, be them tariffs or quantitative restrictions, you are forcing the rest of the world to lower its price, right? So you get what we call the optimal tariff, it's like determination. And again, I don't want to overstate this, because for most countries, including the US, the ability to exploit, right, terms of trade is small. And when you move to exploit in terms of trade in different industries, while the US can exploit terms of trade in some industries, it will be hurting from other countries exploiting terms of trade in other industries. And for many, this is a motivation that led to institutions like GATT and WTO being enacted, right? It's like to, in the end, compete away those terms of trade motivations for restricting access to different markets, right? And another extension for this paper that I'm going to mention briefly when we move from theory to empirics, right, is that we derive, we develop a model of legislative bargaining over trade policy making. For those familiar with the American politics literature, this is related to the Barron and Ferguson model. It's kind of like a divide the dollar game, a distributed game in a multi-member body, right? It's like that leads to under which conditions can you result in a bargain over the distribution, in this case of the benefits of restricting and opening up to trade across different individuals. We can talk about that later, but we use this model to show, that something that will come later on, which is the welfare weights that we estimate, are consistent with the interpretation of the prediction from that legislative bargaining model. More to this to come, right? Now, we also make what we consider a very, important methodological contribution, which is connecting the concepts derived from the theory directly to the empirics, right? How do we do this? We take a prediction from our model, right? And identify, and estimate directly the parameters from that model. Using data that characterizes each of the elements in that prediction. It'll become apparent shortly, but that's the idea. So what we do is, this could be what relates to this EITM framework, right? Is that a direct relation, transfer or translation from theory to empirics, right? All the concepts that go into our estimations come directly from the theory, right? And they're not reduced form. It's like tests. We're more in the business of estimation rather than tests. And that's the idea. And the key for doing that is we want to figure out if we can quantify the relative influence of different districts and sectors, right, in the observed patterns of protection that happen in the US, right? So the key for us is estimating structure and parameters from these models, right? What we call the welfare weights. And we're going to zoom into one period, in the US history, which is 2002, which is the first presidential election after China access to WTO and gets MFN treatment in the US, right? Which leads to this big shock into manufacturing activity in the US, right? So that's the methodological contribution. There's another one that we can talk later. We bring into this literature Bartik type instruments, to deal with issues of endogeneity in the estimation, right? And so by combining the theoretical and methodological contributions, right, we can derive, structural parameters from the models, right, that help us identify winners and losers from trade policy. This is what we estimate the welfare weights. We're also able to identify the relative influence of exporters, right, that give us a hint why trade protection remained low in the US, despite some critical districts in this country getting wiped out. I mean, it's like because they weren't getting no protection or compensation, and even I mean, it's like during the time of the backlash against globalization. And then we can also use this exercise, I mean, it's like to run some counterfactual estimations, right? Among other things, to characterize something that we do not observe, which is what are the district level preferred tariffs, right? Which we don't observe. I mean, because at the district level, I mean, it's like the representative of the districts ultimately, right, are reacting to what they expect the legislature to enact. I mean, so they're being strategic. So we don't observe what they're demanding, what they're bringing to the bargaining table. We only observe what the output of that bargaining is, right? But using, I mean, it's like our model and the data, we're able to estimate what we would infer the district preferred tariffs would be, and we can compare that level of demand for protection, right, with the protection received, and it's like in the vector of tariffs and non-tariff barriers that the US has enacted. And that gives you a measure of what we call unmet demand for protection that could be quite sizable for some sectors in some districts. Okay, so that's our contribution. So this, I mean, for us, I mean, it's key. I mean, it's like to think about this idea. I mean, it's like that we can connect theory and empirics more tightly and help advance in the political economy of trade, bring it closer to what advances we observe in other areas. For example, in trade, since the Eaton and Kortum famous papers, there's a tighter relationship between theory and empirics. And what we see is a movement back and forth from theory to empirics to advance our understanding of what drives trade and what are its consequences. And this is something we cannot do if we don't rely on a common theoretical framework and a direct, I mean, it's like empirical estimation. Okay. So let me start. I mean, it's like presenting the model, and as we go along, we'll start. I mean, moving from theory to empirics, and it'll become apparent what we are doing, right? So let's take I mean, it's like a general model. I mean, it's like right, and again, I mean, this is a broad model that could be applied to. I mean, it's like the national tariff that's enacted, or the tariff that will be preferred by representatives from a district, right? So let's start briefly with, I mean, it's like our model of the economy. Now, again, in this paper, we rely on this model, which is a specific factors model, very similar to the one that you see in Grossman and Helpman. The underlying model of the economy, a specific factors model, tells you that there are some factors of production that are specific for producing some outputs, and then there's another mobile factor that can move across different industries, right, and complement the specific factor to produce output. But then we have, I mean, it's like another sector, I mean, it's like, which is, you can think about it as a non-tradable sector or the numeraire sector. I mean, it's like sector 0 that only uses a mobile factor to produce output, right? So you can think about, I mean, the sector 0 as being all those things that cannot be traded, including services, right? And that's an area where the mobile factor, usually labor is the label we put on that factor, is the one that are more likely to produce there. So these are abstractions, but it's a way that allows us to do that, right? So we have J sectors. It's like, right? Sectors are indexed by J, and they could be many. I mean, it's like in our empirical applications, we're constrained by data availability. So we'll work with sectors disaggregated at the 3-digit level. I'm happy to talk more about that and what we're doing beyond that, right? And that puts some limits on the number of weights we can estimate that you'll see later. But if we have access to more disaggregated data, we'll be able to, I mean, it's like estimate more weights that our theory can accommodate and will lead to a richer analysis, I mean, it's like of the political economy of trade. Then we have regions, right? I mean, it's like, so we have sectors and we have regions. Regions, we call them R, and they are, I mean, they're indexed by R. They can be from 1 through R. So to give you an example, in the US case, R could be like the 435 congressional districts, right? So it will be output of good J in district R, which would be, I mean, congressional district aid in California, for instance, right? So, but I mean, this is just, I mean, it's like to illustrate what that means. And then there are two types of agents, economic agents. I mean, it's like aside from the representative of these agents, right, which we characterize by M, and those could be labor and capital. I mean, this is just, I mean, it's like a notation that we choose for simplicity. You can call them whatever you want. L and K is traditional. So K is a specific factor, which is immobile across goods, right? So Kj can only be used for producing output Xj, right? So and then there's a non-sector specific factor L that's mobile across sectors, but not mobile, but within a region, but not mobile across regions. We can relax that later on, but this is just a setting that allows us to compare our predictions to other models out there, right? And so the key here is that you have the output sector 0 in region R, and the value of that output is a function of the amount of labor used in producing that good in region R, multiplied by the wage. I mean, it's like what you pay that factor to be employed, right? So the cost get translated into the prices, and the total good is a function of the total cost times the total amount of labor used. And then we have output of, I mean, it's like the J sectors in region R, which are a function, I mean, it's like of, which are a function of, I mean, it's like a production function, right? It's like with constant returns to scale that uses labor and specific capital for that good, right? Okay, so it's a constant returns to scale technologies. For simplicity, again, the model is flexible. You can put whatever underlying model of the economy you want. I mean, it's like, and for tractability, I think this is better for us. Okay, so preferences of the agents M are quasi-linear, and it's like there's a linear component. It's the consumption of the numeric good X naught or X zero, and the summation of the utility that they receive for consuming, right? Goods Xj, right? Along, I mean, it's like as a consumer that leads to consumer surplus, right? So you can think that the indirect utility function, I mean, it's like for any of those actors, I mean, in any of those individuals, is how much they receive as factor income, as contribution to production, a share of the tariff revenue that they get, I mean, from the taxes that are levied on the goods that are being imported, and I mean, it's like their consumer surplus, right? I mean, it's like it's the difference between the evaluation of the goods that they are consuming minus the cost of those goods. So the price of the goods goes up, the consumer surplus goes down. Okay. So for the non-specific factor for labor, right? It's like the well-being of labor in industry J and region R as a function of prices, right? It's like is a function of the wages paid times the number of actors, I mean, producing that good, right? Times, I mean, it's like their share, right, of the revenue from taxation that increases in P and hence increases in taxes, minus, I mean, it's like it's like the loss in consumer surplus as prices go up, right? So wages are constant, I mean, it's like for labor, I mean, it's like, but for a specific factor, I mean, the return is the profits they receive as prices go up. So if you're a producer that owns specific factor of a capital that's used for production of J, and the price of J goes up, right? Then you have higher profits, higher returns. Then you receive some part of the distribution of the tariff revenue. I mean, it's like there. And then you get a loss from the drop in consumer surplus that results from the higher prices, right? So this is, I mean, it's like this is just explaining that, I mean, the number of agents the number of agents in each sector, I mean, it's like, and region, international prices, right? The domestic prices that are a function of the international prices plus the tariff, right? The total consumer surplus of agents of type M, tariff revenue, right? And pi JR with this return to a specific factor owner, right? So with this in mind, I mean, it's like at hand, we can derive the preferences that will be demanded, right? By, I mean, a representative from a district of a district R, right? So we zoom into R, and just assume for this exercise that what would be the tariff that a representative from any districts would choose, right? I mean, it's like if they were allowed to make the policy for the whole nation, right? So you pick a district in Texas, right? And allow that representative from that district, I mean, to enact the policy, I mean, it's like for the whole country, okay? So that's the idea. So what would this actor do? It will maximize a welfare function omega R for that district, right? And then as a function of maximize omega as a function of the vector of tariffs, right? And it's like for different goods, right? And that maximization is a function of the well-being of labor in the different, I mean, it's like industries in the district, times the weight that each of those actors have on the representatives, I mean, objective function, plus, I mean, it's like the welfare of the specific factors owner in the districts times the weights that they place. And these weights will be flexible, and these are key, our main difference with the existing literature. I mean, the idea is that what we can get from this, right, is that policymakers could be placing different weights on the welfare of labor or on the welfare of specific factors owners, right? So to think about is, I mean, what it would look like in the Grossman and Heldman, right? Suppose that, I mean, it's like in the Grossman and Heldman, labor is one that determines, I mean, it's like the benefits to consumers, right? And will lead to aggregate welfare, and aggregate welfare will be maximized when the tariffs are zero, right? So if you start imposing higher tariffs, you're going to provide, I mean, it's like more weights on the well-being of some actors. And in the Grossman and Heldman, those weights are driven by the contributions that the owners of the specific factors make to the policymaker. Okay, so the key here, the most important, yes.
Oh, yeah. Sorry to interject again, and I have a couple of questions. And sure. But first of all, and one student asked, and actually, Glenn is a PhD candidate and at UT Dallas, and he sure. asked a question regarding the methodology. I think specifically EITM, and he said he's not familiar with EITM, which is new to him, and but he is familiar with something called Clio metrics. And are these two methodologies similar? Are they significant different? Are there significant differences? I think that is regarding, I look up Cliometrics, and that is about getting theory and getting some evidence from history and then match it with economic theory and then data. And yeah. Have you heard of this term? And then maybe Glenn can speak up and you talk about. Yeah, Cliometrics is something.
Yeah. But the EITM framework is this idea that we start. I mean, it's like with some, I mean, with some usually formal theory, right? I mean, and try to identify, right? And you create the analogs, right? It's like which are, I mean, it's like in that sense, theoretical concepts, right? I mean, it's like. And you characterize that and take those and find the empirical analogs for those to do the estimations to figure out if that theory is actually explaining some outcomes, right? So yeah. The idea, the framework comes about because from the 80s and 90s and all the way through early 2000s, right? there was a divergence, right? It's like in particularly in political science, right? It's like economists went a different route, but now they tend to be converging. In terms of people who are doing theory, I mean, usually called formal theory, right? Not political philosophy, and people were doing empirics, right? And so there was no direct connection. People who are doing theory were not thinking about empirics. People who are doing empirics were not thinking about theory. There were some people who were trying to bridge that, saying, okay, I'm going to test some predictions from this theory, but they would do a reduced form and say, it's like, if this is correct, this is what we should be expecting, and these are the tests that we're running. And that was one way of going. So EITM tried to integrate this, right, into finding a more direct connection between the concepts that come from the theory with their, I mean, it's like the empirical analogs that need to be used to estimate the parameters from that theory, right? So that's the framework, and that's, I mean, the book that Sunny and Jim, I mean, it's like put forward. And EITM has been, I mean, it's like having seminars. We have our EITM Institute, I mean, it's like, which we discontinued in the pandemic, but we're not bring back soon. But there are other EITM, I mean, it's like seminars across the country, including at ICPSR. So there's a constant, I mean, it's like talk among EITM practitioners on what's the progress that we're making, right? So one of the things that people are looking into is, in recent years, is trying to bring the EITM closer to the identification revolution. I mean, it's like, and using experiments and field experiments, right? To get a stronger power into our ability of making causal claims, right? Now,
How about that? Not, I think we do not want to delay your presentation. Maybe we can have some more Q&A and the second hour, so you can also talk about it. I think it's very exciting information about EIT and the movement. Now, I have another question regarding your equation. It's okay, so we can go back to your research and your presentation here. Regarding the omega, maximization of omega, and you talk about two summations here. Now, can you maybe use an example to illustrate, maybe get a real life example? For example, in Arizona congressional member, and he needs to get some support from a local factory, and for example, and they want to produce a gadget here, and then so in the meantime, and we need to make sure that welfare coming from the request of these factory owners and needs to be maximized. And can you explain this? And maybe in daily terms, so my our participants can understand.
So that's exactly what it is, right? So I mean, it's like if you're interested in the genesis of this idea from which Ted Grossman and Hillman comes, but it's related to this, there's a very interesting paper. I mean, it's like by R.E.A. Hillman, right? It's like that talks about what he calls the political support function, right? So let me simplify this. Suppose that there are two actors within this economy, right? Some actors are producers and some are consumers, right? Okay. So if you produce a good, I mean, you want a higher price for that good, right? Because if the price of the good goes up, I mean, you're able to, I mean, it's like pay for the inputs in production, right? I mean, get a markup and pocket that market for you, right? Or even allow you to remain competitive. I mean, it's like, and you don't need to face, I mean, it's like a competition that will lower that price. Okay. So if you are a representative of a district that has that industry, right, you might be, I mean, it's like incentivized, right, to try to demand a policy that would increase the price of that output good, right? Okay. Now, on the other side, I mean, it's like you have another actor who does not produce that good, right, but consumes the good. So if the price of the good goes up, right, then that actor who consumes but does not produce it, right, is hurt if you raise the price of that production good, right? In your case, it's the widget, right? It's like you are a producer of widget and the other one is a consumer of widget, right? Or I mean, it's like
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, it's like you are in the Permian Basin in Texas. You are a producer of oil, or you are a consumer of oil, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if you raise, I mean, the price of oil, right? I mean, it's like suppose that you are, I mean, it's like you run a company, right? I mean, it's like that uses oil, I mean, as input in producing, I mean, it's like the energy that you need to produce another good, right? So if they raise the price on the widget, right, you're hurt, right? So the policymaker has to
Yeah.
trade
Mm-hmm.
off, I mean, right, the support from one or the other
Mm-hmm.
one, right? And they will do that in such a way, right, that's driven by these weights. If I care more about the well-being, the welfare of L, the actor L, because these, right, it's like lambda here, I mean, it's like is high, right?
Mm-hmm.
I care less about the lambda for this actor, for K, right? For the well-being of K, right? So I have to trade off one for the other one. That's kind of the idea here, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so to give you, I mean, the definition of this, suppose that every single district specializes in different goods, right? So if I'm representative of the place that only produces widget, I want a higher price for widgets and a low price for everything else, right? Okay. So that's kind of what the representative might be demanding. Now, if I have a bunch of these districts there, right, I might want to provide some protection to several of those because that might lead, I mean, get me more support within the district, but it comes at a cost within my district and outside my district, and that's what I'm trading off. Okay. And so the level for which I trade off is driven by, I mean, it's like, who do I care more about? I mean, how much weight, how large is the lambda for L or the lambda for K, right? In this case. And that would tell me that I would enact a policy that actually increases the well-being of K or increases the well-being of L. Now, if they're both, I mean, it's like in the same industry and so on, they both benefit, so I would always be willing to cater to them, right? Okay? Is this clear?
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Okay, so now we can take, and after some algebra, I mean, it's like put some structure. Carlos, unfortunately, I mean, it's like since I have the full screen here, I didn't open up, I mean, it's like the chat, so I'm not following. If there's anything, could you, I mean, do just
I will
like
do that. I will relay the question or comments if there's any. All right, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah. So this is the basic setup, right? Now what we do is we put structure behind that. I mean, it's like, as I mentioned, right? What's the production function for these different types of goods, right? What's the utility of different actors and so on. So we can characterize, I mean, put more stuff into Omega that I showed you earlier. And now we can decide, okay, if the representative from District J was allowed to choose the tariff for good J, if the representative from District R was allowed to choose the tariff for District J, right? Then we can characterize the optimal tariff as this equation, right? That has three components. One is the inverse, I mean, it's like of the first derivative, I mean, it's like of imports, I mean, it's like right? With respect to taxes. If I increase the taxes, imports goes down, right? Because they become more expensive, right? So this first term is positive, right? Then we have within the square brackets, we have three components, right? The first component, right, is like, right, is the return to specific factors, right? The return to specific factors, right, means like, which is the profits that they get divided by the number of those actors in that district, right? The second component, right, means like is consumer surplus, right? Is how much demand for these goods, right, means like goes up or down. What for the goods consumed by labor or by capital goes up or down. So this one, right, means like in the end will push the tariff down, because if I raise the tariff, consumption, the price of that good J is gonna go up, so consumers hurt. And the last one is just, I mean, it's like looking at tariff revenue, which is likely to be positive, right? If I raise the tariff, right, is like I'm charging a tax on any unit of the imported good that then I can distribute. I mean, it's like for different purposes, or I can use it to build bridges or whatever it is that you use it, or just give it back to consumers to do what they want, right? So one thing that we put here is that this right, I mean, it's like this lowercase lambda, right, is the summation, right? I mean, it's like of, right, across all j's, right? I mean, of the weights that I place on actor M, and the summation in the region includes all the weights that I place on owners of labor plus the weights that I place on the owners of capital, right? So that's kind of the key here, right? So you can think that all these weights, right, normalized by the total weights, this will tell you, right? It's like, what's the weight that is being placed on producers of the specific factors, right? This is what's the weights that's placed, right, on labor as consumer and capital as consumer, right? And that will determine, I mean, it's like if I put more weights on consumers, then the tariff is gonna go up, down. If I put more weights on producers, right, the tariff is gonna go up, right? So that's kind of the idea for the district, right? Okay, so this is a prediction from the model. I mean, it's like, now the problem with this is that we don't observe. Now we can convert this in terms of ad valorem tariffs, right? Because we want to take this to the data, right? And then make some assumptions about consumption to simplify our life. I mean, say that that the demand by different actors is pretty much the same, right? It's like, so total demand is the number of actors times, I mean, the individual demand. Assume that preferences for consumption are identical. We had more data, we could estimate different types of consumption patterns for different types of individuals, rich or poor. I mean, it's like those were specific factors, those who are not, more educated, less educated, and so on and so forth. But for simplicity, given what we have here, we do that. So now we can characterize the ad valorem tariff preferred by the representative of district R, right, as this function, right? I mean, it's a function of imports and the elasticity of imports, right? The weights on specific factors owners times the output per capita per person that owns specific capital in the districts, minus this constraint, which is the consumption and tax side, right? So we can rearrange these terms and we can get this expression, right? Expression right here, which tells you that the ad valorem tariff is a function, right? It's like of the ratio of output to imports normalized by the elasticity of import, I mean, it's like demand, minus the total outputs minus total imports of that good in the country, also normalized by the elasticity of import demand, right? So the key here is that with this expression, right, it's like we might be able to, I mean, it's like take this to the data, right, and analyze. I mean, it's like how much weight in each district. I mean, it's like do owners of capital have with respect to, I mean, it's like owners of labor, right? So these components are all measurable, right? We can measure the quantities produced locally, allocate the imports to each region, right? These elasticities are estimated by some elements, right? This is total production of that good. This is total imports, and this is the elasticity, right? But also for intuition, right? Let's think about the following, right? So suppose that the weights that the decision maker places on owners of labor or capital are the same, right? So if you lose one vote from an owner of capital, you can make it up by an owner of labor, right? So each of those, right, you're trading off. If that's the case, if all the weights are the same, right, then the ad valorem tariff would be positive if there's more concentration, right? The demand for the tariff, right? The tariff that the local representative would choose, right? I mean, it's like for this good J in district R, will depend on the ratio. I mean, it's like per capita ratio. I mean, it's like of production of that good in the district compared to the national level. So if the district is more concentrated, right, you gain more from protecting the producers, right, than you lose from consumption of the good. It's like elsewhere. So it's a benefit to have a higher tariff. Now, if your ratio of production is lower than the national, right, than the average national, then you'll demand a tariff of 0, right? So no protection. So if you're highly concentrated in one industry, I mean, which is what we showed before, that representative is going to demand more protection for that industry. If you're less concentrated than ever, you're going to demand lower protection for that industry, right? So that's kind of the main prediction from this individual level. Now, we don't observe the preferred level of the tariff, right? At base, what we observe is whether or not a legislature votes for a bill that increases or reduces tariff, but we don't know what they prefer. We see what they vote, right? Might assume that they vote if it's about one threshold that increases the well-being. I mean, it's like of their. I mean, it's like a district they will vote for. If it decreases the well-being of the district, they will vote against. But we don't observe this, right? So one of the things that we can do with our analysis, right? I mean, it's like is try to figure out. I mean, it's like if we can connect this to the data. And see, I mean, if we can derive, I mean, it's like an expression of what the demand for protection might be, right? Okay, so remember, this is the equation that we want to estimate, right? The ad valorem tariff, right? The tariff over the price plus the tariff, right? For good J, as a function of the relative weights that are placed, right? Means like on owners of the specific factors, times, right, it's like the ratio of output to imports in the districts minus the total amount of production to imports at the national level, standardized by the elasticity, right? So these three components bring together this idea of the benefits of raising the tariff, right? It's like to cater to specific factors owners and the cost to consumers, right? Okay, so the key here, right, is that we can connect theory to empirics because all these elements are measurable except for the weights, which is what we're trying to estimate, right? The relative weights on different actors, right? So we know what the tariffs are. We know how much the district produces of good J. We can allocate. I mean, it's like the imports of J. I mean, it's like to the district with some assumptions. We can measure the elasticities or draw it on the elasticity estimated by others, right? So all these are measurable, so we can take this to the data, right? Okay, so we have ad tariffs, we have output, imports, import demand elasticities, and we have the number of individuals producing in the district, the specific factors, and the total number of workers, right? So now, the issue we're facing here is that the data that can be used for this is collected at some geographical level, and we have to convert it, right, to congressional districts. So that was a tough exercise. Along the way, due to non-disclosures by the census, we lose 2 congressional districts. So we're only able to estimate data for 433 districts, right? And our data, I mean, it's like after imputation and like accounts for pretty much 10 million manufacturing workers and 77% of manufacturing output in the year 2020 and in the year 2002, right? Okay, the data that we collect comes from the tariffs comes from US ITC, right? Output and consumption come from county business patterns. Employment, I mean, it's like comes also for county business patterns and the NBR manufacturing database. Import elasticities, import demand elasticities come from estimates by Keene, Isita, and Olarriaga. And then I mean, it's like this is something we're going to use later on when we have the model with large countries and exports. The export supply elasticities are also estimated by Nisita and company. Okay, so let me show you what the data looks like. Right, this is for 20 NICS 3 industries is this measure, right? QJR MJR divided by the elasticity, something that in the Grossman-Feldman is called Z over E, right? It's output to imports over elasticity, right? And so if you look, like the first here is food, right? So food is relatively concentrated. I mean, it's like the Gini is 0.41, right? Okay. Beverages a little more concentrated. I mean, it's like these are the Lorentz curves, right? I mean, it's like, so on the horizontal axis you have, I mean, it's like, right? Line up all the districts, right? I mean, it's like, and this is the concentration of output for each of these industries of this, right? So apparel, much more concentrated, right? Most districts have very little, I mean, production of apparel. A few districts have a lot. So the Gini is 75. Same for textiles, right? I mean, it's like, and this is something that we saw before, right? Leather, highly concentrated, right? Plastics, less concentrated. Food, not so much concentrated. Furniture, miscellaneous, not so much concentrated. Fabricated metals on the low side, right? So these are the numbers that we're going to plug into our estimation, right? Okay, but what this picture is showing you, right, is that not all industries are in all congressional districts, right? So some congressional districts have lower than average, right, it's like proportion of output of the specific, I mean, it's like good that we observe here, right? But there's also variation across industries, I mean, in terms of the degree of concentration, right? So not all districts are fully diversified. Not all districts are fully, I mean, it's like, right, specialized. There's a mixture of these, right? I mean, it's like, and so that's going to tell us that the demand for protection that we would observe will be slightly different across districts, right? So in order to take this further into the data, we run two, I mean, counterfactual exercises, right? So the first exercise, counterfactual, is the following. So let's assume that the level of protection that we observe at the national level is optimal for all the 433 districts that we have here, right? Okay. So if that's the case, right, I mean, it's like if each of these districts would have chosen the level of protection that we observe, what would it tell us in terms of which actors do they weigh more heavily in their optimization or maximization problem, right? Do they weigh more heavily owners of specific factors or the mobile factor, right? That's the first exercise, right? So the counterfactual is like, let's assume that given our model, right, it's like the vector of tariffs that we observe is optimal for those districts. What does it tell us? I mean, it's like of the implicit, I mean, it's like, right, weight on owners of specific factors, on owners of labor, right? So that's the first exercise. And the second one is, right, okay, let's assume that the policymaker, the local policymaker values, puts the same weights on labor and capital. If that's the case, given the structure of production, what level of protection for that industry would they demand, right, for each district? And the findings, I mean, it's like, which I'll summarize here, is that let me show you the graphs and then we'll discuss the finding, right? So this is the graph. This is the implicit weights on capital to labor, right, across different districts, right? So if this ratio is higher than 1, right, it will tell you that for that legislature, right, it's like in those districts, they place more weight on the well-being of owners of the specific factor, right? If it's less than 1, it means that relatively they place more weight on the well-being of the mobile factor, right? So what you see from this picture is very different from what we saw before, right? Only, right, is like for 75% of the 433 districts, right, it's like the specific factors gets weights lower than 1 relative to labor. That means that labor right? The mobile factor gets higher weights as reflected for the tariff. So that means that not many of these, I mean, it's like owners of specific capital are getting their way, right? So as you can observe, I mean, it's like anything that doesn't have yellow or white is the places where you have I mean, it's like a positive level of catering, I mean, it's like to labor, to a specific capital, right? So that's the first exercise. So that's tell you that this does not vote well for specific factors owners. They tend not to, right? The tariffs that we observed, I mean, it's like are not reflecting that specific factors owners are getting protection, right? And we can observe that, I mean, it's like by looking at this picture. I'm missing a slide here, 1 second. Okay, so this is the raw data. I mean, it's like the second and third column are the number of lines within each of these NIC 3 industry levels that have some level of tariff protection, and the average protection, I mean, it's like that they receive, right? So we can do that for all the districts, right? All the sectors, right? And if we average across all sectors, it gives us that, I mean, it's like the average level of protection through tariffs is less than 5%, 3.5%, give or take. There's more protection through NTMs, no tariff measures, right? I mean, it's like, right? Okay. And that protection reaches on average, I mean, it's like 13%. Okay. Now, the next exercise we do is we estimate the predicted tariffs, right? I mean, it's like for each of these sectors, right? I mean, it's like assuming that the decision maker is trading off specific factors, support from specific factors or from labor, right? And as you can observe, I mean, it's like the predicted demand for tariffs for any of these tariffs and NTMs in any of these issues is close to 52%, right? Some levels like foods, the prediction is like it's 100, I mean, it's like 22%, right? For others, it's relatively low. I mean, for leather and apparel, it's 4.2, I mean, right? Okay. And now if we look at the number of districts, right, for which we would predict that the specific tariff, I mean, it's like on each line, right, I mean, it's like is greater than 0, right? It's always, I mean, below the number of districts that would muster a majority in Congress, right? So on average, only 134 districts, right, means like have positive, I mean, it's like predicted tariffs, right, means like based on this account. So I tell you that even if I mean, it's like a legislator representing a district that wants to demand, I mean, it's like on average tariffs for beverages at 54% would come together, they would only reach up to 147 legislators, which is far less than a majority needed, right, to do that, right? And if you assume that this is concentrated differently, that tells you that it's really hard for these legislatures to come up to a majority, right? So this is the distribution, right, by sectors, right? This one is food. It's hard to read, but this one is food. This one is furniture. This one is transportation, right? So this tells you what are the predicted levels, right? I mean, it's like of tariff. I mean, it's like demanded by different congressional districts across different industries. So if you look at this, right, there's no clear pattern. I mean, it's like where you see that you can find a majority of districts that would demand protection for each of these, for each of the districts. And so that tells you that's likely why, I mean, it's like when it comes to aggregating to the national level, you don't get, right, the level of protection required, right? Okay. So the key is that in order to be able to pass policy, right, it's like it's not a centralized decision maker that's maximizing the well-being of all districts. It's a bunch of these representatives from different districts who have different preferences for trade. They have to come together and create a majority. Okay, so let's move to that. I mean, so how do we move from these tariff at the district level, right, to tariffs at the national level, right? So let's start, I mean, briefly with the small country case, right? In the small country case, right, you have a similar, I mean, it's like, right, a similar equation that we had before, but now we're summing across all R's, all districts, right? At the national level, right, we would have weights for industries in districts, and they have to add up, I mean, it's like to the omega for the whole country, right? Now let's assume that there are only tariffs allowed. We can derive, I mean, it's like a prediction, just like in the Grossman and Hellman type that we did before, right? And it could be, I mean, it's like ultimately summarized, right, into this equation that can be taken to the data, right? So it's the sum of the weights, I mean, it's like, right, on capital owners to total weights, right? I mean, it's like by the number of individuals who participate, I mean, it's like in the production of these goods, right, minus what we had before. So all the action here is which of these weights, I mean, it's like across sectors and across sectors and industries, right? I mean, it's like which of the interests are weighted more heavily, right? When we combined the preference of the different districts that should muster a majority, right? So you can think about, I mean, it's like three basic components from this prediction, right? One is the demand for protection component, which is this part here, right? Okay. So this demand will increase with as with before with the regional output to, it's like regional output to national output ratios, right? Then the consumption distortion component, right? It's like we increase prices, right? It will affect the demand for this, right? And the bottom line is that, I mean, it's like that none of the districts can enact the policies by themselves, so they need to coalesce through a legislative bargaining process, right? And in another paper that I'm not going to discuss today, we show that that bargain will result, right? It's like that the tariff is going to be a convex combination, right, of the district preferred tariffs of the members of the coalition, right, that masters a majority in Congress, right? So that's the small country case. And now we can move to a large country case, right? In the large country case, what we do is instead of having the prices of the goods as a given, right? Those prices can be affected, right? I mean, it's like by our restriction of imports from other countries by increasing the tariffs, and their restriction of our exports to that country by restricting their tariffs on us, right? So now you have two countries. I mean, it's like simplicity, we use the US and the rest of the world. We have a good J, which is the importable good, and then we have a good G, which is exported by the US, right? Again, for simplicity, we only use, I mean, it's like tariffs and not subsidies. I mean, it's like we can talk about this if you want later on. I mean, subsidies are in the current regime prohibited, I mean, by WTO, but they can be modeled. I mean, harder to find data on them. But I mean, for now, with tariffs should do. And then what we do is incorporate what we call the terms of trade effects. And that means that the world price is no longer given, right? The US is no longer a price taker. The US can affect, means like, right, the price of the good by imposing a tariff. If the US raises a tariff on TJ, the price of TJ drops, right? Because we're restricting, I mean, it's like the amount that we demand that makes that good, right? It's like more abundant abroad. So in order for that to clear the markets, the price has to drop. So we can force the other country to lower the prices on us. That's why it's a terms of trade externality. Now, the other country can do the same on us, right? They can impose a tariff on our exports that would restrict our ability to export to them. That would result in a cost. I mean, it's like, right? I mean, lowering the price of our goods so the market can clear, right? And so they can impose that terms of trade externality to us, right? So in order to resolve these issues, right, it's like the countries come together. I mean, it's like in the U.S. case, since RTAA was with negotiating reciprocal concessions with other countries to compete away those terms of trade externalities, right? And this is what we model. I mean, it's like in the large country case, right? So the key here is that the price of the good is now a function, right? I mean, it's like of the domestic and world prices and how countries restrict those two. Okay, so that's kind of the idea for the large country case. So when we add the large country case, right, the prediction, right, means like adds, different components, right? One of the components is we change the elasticities by a combined elasticity that I'm going to show you in the next slide, right? And that means that the elasticity of import demand and export supply are now connected, right? So it's not just as we had before the import demand, is that if I increase the price, I mean, it's like on my good, I'm going to affect my export, that those exports are going to affect me back. So it's a different elasticity here, which can be estimated. Now, we had the importers, right? Before, we had the exporters here, right? And then there's a term here, which is mu times theta JG, which is, I mean, it's like a measure that combines the relative ability of the U.S. to impose cost on the other country, right? And the expected cost of retaliation from the other country that will affect, I mean, it's like how much we get, right, from imposing those restrictions. And then this also shows up on the consumption side, right? Because if the price of my export goes up, then my domestic consumers of the exports will benefit. So it takes away, I mean, it's like from the cost. So this is a new element that we need to estimate. Right? I mean, it's like, and these results, I mean, it's like in a different types of setup. I'm gonna, I mean, skip this so we can get to the empirical applications next, right? So the key extra elements that we have is that this theta G, JG, right, which is the ratio of how much the price of the exportable changes, right? I mean, it's like with the increase in the tariff on my exports relative to how much the price of the domestic, I mean, imported good raises when I increase the ratio, right? And this is, I mean, it's like always, I mean, it's like less than zero, right? I mean, it's like these are both, one is positive and the other one is negative, right? And so this is the terms of trade effect that we talked about as a function of retaliation. So this is something we can measure. I mean, it's like approximately by using import demand and export supply elasticities and their relationship. There's the other concept, mu J, that we cannot measure, but it's a measure of the relative bargaining strength of the US in sector J. Since we're using the rest of the world, it's really hard to identify because we have relative bargaining strength vis-a-vis Mexico, but not China, right? So this is, I mean, it's like hard to measure. So this we use, I mean, it's like different calibrations and robustness checks and show that I mean, different values of these do not affect. And then we have this delta J, which is a combination of the import demand elasticity and the export supply elasticity, right? Which is ultimately how the elasticity is affected in the process of trade, which is also measurable, right? So we can take all of these two data as we did before, right? So in order to do that, I mean, now we have two estimating equations. One is for the small country case. So we're going to estimate these beta R's, which are from which we can retrieve the relative weights of labor and capital as a function of everything that can be measured, right? Imports, I mean, it's like elasticities, number of actors in the region, number of specific factors owners in the region, right? I mean, it's like this alpha is going to be constrained to be -1 for the estimation, right? But ultimately, this BR is going to be a reflection, right, of the relative weights of capital. I mean, it's like to the summation of the weights from capital and labor. I mean, all these elements, we cannot estimate them separately given the number of sectors that we have, but we can back out, I mean, it's like these numbers from the beta parameters that we estimate. For the large country case, I mean, it's like we have more parameters to estimate. So we have the parameters for the import competing, it's like industries, this is better. We have the parameters for the exported sector, which in this case we constrain to being only one computers, right? And then it's like we have elements to estimate this whole relationship based on imports, elasticities, the theta JG, and the mu that we simulate here, right? And so we can retrieve, right, the relative weights, of capital to total weights. And once we do that, if they have to add up to 1, we can retrieve the weights on the other actors, right? And we do that the same for the exporting sector, right? So we make a few assumptions in order to be able to estimate this, right? But everything is related to just how we fold some of these data to do. And so the key here is that within regions, right, it's like we assume that each of the sectors has the same weight. If we had more data, we could estimate that, but we don't. And then we assume for the exporters, right, means that we assume that the weights are the same across the country. And then we use different values of mu j for robustness. And the last thing that we need to do is, because we don't have, enough sectors, we can only estimate a limited number of aggregations of districts. So we do that, in very different ways. I'm going to show you one which is based on political regions, right? So the idea is, in order to be able to estimate, using these 20-odd sectors that we have, we have to aggregate districts into region. We do one which is only geography, right? So regions are aggregated along geography, 9 subdivisions for the US based on census, and then we do something which is the subdivisions times the partisanship of the district representative, right? So we'll give you 18, subdivisions. And then we do the same for the competitiveness, of the state and the congressional districts in the elections, right? The state in the presidential elections, the districts in the legislative elections. So that gives us 9 regions based on whether the states are safe Republican or safe Democratic or battleground states in the 2000 election. And we do the same for the congressional districts. If the representative wins for over 55%, right? It's safe for each of the parties. If it's in between, it's competitive, right? And then we'll talk about identification later on, right? So these are the descriptive statistics of the different measures that we use, right? It's like for the different sectors and so on. This is the data that goes into the estimation, right? And this is, it's like for the second set of prediction for the political, aggregations. This is how we aggregate the districts in order to be able to estimate, right? So on the rows, we have whether or not the state in which that district is competitive in the presidential election, safe Democratic or safe Republican, and for the House election, where they are competitive, safe Democratic or safe Republican, right? And so this table shows the number of districts within each of these cells, right? The numbers in square brackets is the proportion of manufacturing in each of these districts, right? And the one in parentheses, right, is the proportion of computer, which is the exporting sector in each of the districts, right? Right, this is the addition of all. This is the proportion of computers across all districts, right? And this is what the data looks like when we aggregate, right? So we do the first estimation for the small country case, and I'm happy to show you the regressions if you're interested. These are based on 2-state least square estimates using Bartik type of instruments, and what we find is that that safe Republican districts, in competitive states for the presidential election, get positive weights on specific factors owners, right? Safe Republican districts, in safe states for the presidential ticket, also get positive weights, but you also get some weights, for Democratic districts, right? Okay, So in total, I mean, it's like the safe Democratic districts get, I mean, it's like 14% of the weights. Republican districts get close to 18% of the weights. Altogether, I mean, it's like specific factors get weights of roughly 31% of the total welfare weights. And this figure, I mean, shows you that distribution, I mean, it's like from those estimates, right? So the districts in white get 0, I mean, it's like weight. The ones in dark blue are the ones who get the highest weights. I mean, it's like, and altogether, it shows you that the weights on labor, I mean, it's like, are, I mean, twice as high as those for capital, and that the districts that are safe Republican tend to get higher welfare weights than Democratic districts. Now, when we add exporters, right, the picture looks slightly different, right? The only districts that get positive weights, where the specific factors in import competing industries get positive weights, are safe Republican districts in safe states in the presidential election, and in competitive states in the presidential election, and safe Republican districts, I mean Republican states, and they get roughly like 20% of the welfare weights. The exporting industry, I mean, it's like gets about, I mean, it's like 16%, 17% of the weight. So altogether, I mean, that 35% goes to specific factors owners, the exporters because they want to open up to trade and keep the tariff low, the import competing industries because they want to keep, I mean, the tariff high and they don't care about the exporters. And this is the distribution of welfare weights. Look at this; it's very different from we observe in the map on concentration of manufacturing industry. Right, the Midwest gets completely rolled. I mean, it's like from this negotiation once we account for exporters, right? And this is the concentration of output share of computers, right? These are the districts that the coalition that wants to enact protection can rely on to get to a majority. So let's go to the interpretation of the results, right? So let's think about, I mean, from a legislative bargaining process, right? That we have a representative, I mean, it's like from the 6th congressional district in Florida, who's Cliff Stearns, who happens to be the chairman of the Commerce, Trade, and Consumer Protection Subcommittee, right? So if Stearns is the one driving the agenda, right, I mean, it's like to enact tariffs, I mean, that would benefit a majority of a coalition that he can put together, he can combine, I mean, it's like, right? 80 representatives from safe Republican states in safe representative districts, right? From a small country, 75, I mean, it's like, right? Representatives from safe Democratic states in safe Democratic districts, 51 in safe Republican states and safe Democratic districts, and 83, right? It's like from his group, right? Safe competitive state and safe Democratic districts, right? All of these groupings, specific factors owners, right? Means like get, right? Are weight greater than 1, right? They're weighted more heavily than labor, right? And altogether, right? They don't reach a super majority. It's just a majority large enough potentially to be veto-proof, right? But it's not 300, right? I mean, it's like, and it's not below, I mean, it's like, right? The number that you need to get a majority, right? So it makes it presidential veto-proof, this type of majority, right? Now, for the large country case, I mean, it's like we get a slightly different picture. The support will come from 163 representatives, right? In competitive states with safe Republican districts or safe Republican states with safe representative districts, right? And then they can add 55 more, I mean, it's like to reach a majority, and those could come, right? I mean, it's like from any of these combinations of districts with a higher concentration, right? Of pro-free trade computer industry representatives, right? So this is the idea. So in the end, right? I mean, it's like this is just an exercise to show that we can build a general version of a political economy of trade with decentralized decision makers, right? It's like and bringing exporters to the table, help explain why many of the places that had high demand for protection did not get, and that might lead to a fallout. Right? It's like politically from the China shock, districts that would benefit a lot from protection did not get it and didn't get any compensation out of it, despite voting for representatives that might. I mean, it's like having the agenda protecting them in the first place, right? And also we are able to identify, I mean, it's like what's the relative influence of specific factors owners, right? I mean, it's like in the calculus that policymakers have, I mean, it's like when they decide to enact protection, I mean, it's like, so now the key is that once that exporting sectors, I mean, it's like who are trying to keep the tariff low, tend to, I mean, it's like overwhelm import competing industries, right? It's like in the demand for protection, that might help explain why, I mean, it's like despite this plight for protection, right? The U.S. level of openness has remained quite high, I mean, it's like over the years, right? So I think I spoke too much. I mean, hopefully we can continue this conversation. I mean, it's like in question and answer. Thank you so much for your patience.
Oh, thank you. This is really, really dense in the information, method, and theory. So this is a lot. Thank you so much. And now let me open up to the floor and to any questions from our participants and on Taiwan side and on US side. But before then, let me quickly introduce to you Professor Peter C.H. Pan, and I call Peter. Peter, are you there? And can you turn on the camera and maybe we can virtually introduce Peter to Plepo and Plepo to Peter. And yeah, I think finally we still have to have some kind of official introduction to the two great professors here. Now, yeah, maybe we can. We do not have much time left, and maybe quickly invite any questions from either side, Taiwan side, or on the US side. Anyone? If we have any questions, and maybe I can start with some simple questions. So I really wish I can have you talk more about EITM, but maybe we should save it for next time. We invite you another time to talk more about EITM, because this is a really promising direction, and particularly for students who wants to, hey, read some, and they read some papers about a formal now, but most of the work they've been trained is still like a methods or empirical. And one thing the EITM movement is to help us to build a stronger theory and more engage with the empirics, and instead of just learning empirical methods without a strong theory. So this is something I want maybe in future Dr. Pinto can come back to us. But today, and you presented a really, really interesting piece of research. I think it's not just one article. You are talking about multiple articles. Now, how do we, for example, we can start from a very small question. And this is an IPD or political economy study. And how do we start from not just the data, but also theorizing or building a theory toward something that's closer to the data we can gather and we can collect? And how do we come up with ideas? Yeah, to really marry maybe we start from marry the data, mirror empirics to the theory, because most of our training in graduate schools nowadays are focused on statistical methods and data. And we do cover research design, and but we still do not have much training in formal models. So how do we, and how would you advise our students in bring the data to the theory, and then start thinking the theory, and then quantify the variables? Yeah, give us some inspirations, maybe.
So I think that the main issue we face in many of our programs, right, is that it's a consumer choice problem that students face, right? There's so many things that they being offered. I mean, it's like, and there's so many things that would like to, classes that would like to take, that sometimes, I mean, we're not guiding them through the training process of what we take. I mean, it's like to be able to engage in this type of agenda. So my sense is, I think that one of the issues that I'm going to speak from on the side of political science, because I think that people in economics, I mean, it's like tend to do more of this, right? We need to, I mean, it's like at least in our programs, right? I mean, to find some common core of training tools that might be required. I mean, it's like, right, for us before we are able to advance into our research, I mean, it's like area, right? And so historically, political methodology, I mean, it's like used to be a combination of both theory in terms of formal theory and empirics, right? But now, I mean, it's like, unfortunately, this is not only not demanded in journals, but sometimes, I mean, you cannot have a pure theory paper in terms of formal theory published in the top outlets in political science, right?
It's hard. It's hard.
I
think I still see some, but it's hard to get a formal theory. Yeah.
It's really hard, and when you talk to editors, they tend to discourage that. They think that you need some empirical component, right? And then, I mean, it's like, again, I mean, it's like the balance in our training has moving, I mean, it's like in a good way. I mean, it's like to put more emphasis into issues of identification and causality, right? And that's what's being rewarded, and that's what students tend to gravitate towards. I mean, it's like when they're looking for training, because it's relatively easy to get published. I'm not saying it's easier to do the stuff right. I mean, but we tend to follow these kind of trends in our discipline. So ideally, what I mean, something we've been trying to do, I mean, it's like with the group talking about EITM as one of the ways of bridging that gap is try to identify how can we navigate student demands by showing them that even if you want to run, I mean, it's like a field experiment, it's good to, I mean, it's like be able to motivate that with some theory, right? And that sound theory, I mean, it's like, because otherwise, I mean, it's like what you wind up doing in many of these instances, I'm going to push it to an extreme, is that we tend to find lots of papers, right? I mean, it's like that do field experiments or other types of experiments that report null results based on a relationship between two concepts that we don't know from theory whether they should be related, right? And so I think that one of the ways that this is going to come back to putting more emphasis into, I mean, it's like in this case, formal theory is to when we start doing this meta-analysis of the empirical type of work.
Yeah. Before I take advantage and ask another question, maybe ask Professor Pan on the Taiwan side. Hi, I think it's good to see you.
Yeah, can you see me now? Can you see me and hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me well? Hear you well.
Well, Well, Dr. Pinto, I'm sorry, I have to apologize for coming in late because of the internet issues here. I'm here in the classroom and actually the seminar room with my students here. Long story short, my apology, and then
No
thank you.
problem.
All right.
Don't worry, don't worry.
Yeah, and then here we have a couple of questions. I try to interpret this to you. So number one, let me do it real quick. That the model, the first question is that, well, thank you for the insights, of course. And then we know the purpose of a model is not to exhaust the possible variables, but how much does this model incorporate non-economic factors such as voter sentiments or district-specific cultural or social background, etc. And I think which are very crucial in actual trade policy debates and can affect the representatives. And then, if, you know, this is the issue. And also, it says that, yeah, and how much can the representative fully represent the interests of their constituencies specified in the models? So that's the first question. Yeah.
Let me take that question. I think that's a fabulous question. It's something we've been, it's like discussing a lot, especially when it comes to our ability to estimate weights, right? So if you think about the model, it's like we allow those weights to be very flexible, right? You might decide that you want to, reward the consumption of some goods, right? So that would result that, that the policymaker, it's like for whatever reason, it could be ideology, it could be, it's like national security, it could be, cultural protection, and so on. They might think that some sector, is worth, putting your finger in the field a little more, right? To tilt towards them, right? And the motivation is similar to them, the campaign contributions, right? The campaign contribution telling is like, or the contributions to the policymakers saying somebody is trying to tilt, right, this balance to their benefit. And so theoretically, that's very flexible, right? Now, empirically, it's trickier. It's like, unless you have a lot of disaggregated data, right? Because the more weights you want to estimate, right, the more sectors that you need, right? It's like, and so if I had access to data at the 8-digit level, I could zoom into, it's like the sector, district, and some characteristics of the industry within that sector, right? So the point is well taken. The limitation here is not theoretical; it's empirical, right? As long as you put some structure, as long as you put some structure on what those weights might mean. Some of those weights might be driven, right, by the sheer number of actors in that activity, or they might be driven by something else that's not related to those to those numbers. So that's the biggest limitation, right? In an extension of the model, we also have lobbying, for instance, right? And that also opens some interesting opportunities here, right? So suppose that you have lobbying, right? Now, some actors can lobby. If you have decentralized decision making, in the theory we can put it, and it's there in an appendix. It's easy to think about. But if you're a decentralized decision maker and you're an industry has to decide, where would you lobby? At your district level or at the legislative level, right? It's like and would you lobby, right? Would you lobby the representative that's already interested, right? It's like in catering to you because you provide a lot of, the support for your community through jobs and economic activity. That legislator is already in your pocket, right? It's already going to advance your agenda, right? And now you have to persuade others, right, to go along with that legislator who's going to be benefiting from you, right? Or it's like so those things are not settled, and I think we can use these models to to push for that, right?
Yeah.
Again, there's a lot of flexibility here. It's just a matter of what is it that drives some decision makers, right? It's like to put more emphasis on some sectors than others.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. And the other is kind of related to because another student, he's interested about how much does let me put it this way, the internal. He's interested in the internal power structures within Congress. And then certainly influence the different committees, and certain committees or leaders may have greater sway over the trade policy. And then the question is, what strategies or data source that you will recommend, based on your experience on this issue, so you can factor in these variables and the data. Yeah.
In the paper here, we just did it anecdotally, right? Assuming that this representative from this committee will be kind of like the agenda setter, right? It's like now in some of the estimations is linked to the president, because some of the NTMs, protections through non-tariff measures, are indirectly enacted by Congress. They delegate authority to the president, so the president can push more strongly, right? It's like to different districts that are more politically expedient for them to do. The structure of Congress could be done if we could estimate more, because we can characterize who of these representatives, right? It's like is a ranking member of a committee, or is a member of the Ways and Means Committee, or is a member, right? It's like of the Trade Committee. But again, for us, I mean, it's like what we might need to do is find more disaggregated data, right? It's like to do that. Now, the alternative might be to do that. It's like we might be able to get. So it's trade-offs, right? We might be able to get more disaggregated data if we move away from the district, because one of the limitations we have is that the census does not allow you, right? It's like to go a very fine grain if it discloses, right, the industry that might be the sole industry in that district, for instance, right? So when that's the case, they do not disclose the information, right? Maybe if we move to the state level, right, which is there's other papers that do that, we might go deeper, right? Because at the state level, then I mean, it's like most industries are more disaggregated, right? But that actually, I mean, it's like it's beneficial in terms of having more, I mean, it's like weights that you can do, but less beneficial because you cannot connect them directly to the more local geographies for the congressional districts, right? So these are the trade-offs that you face. Yep. Now, we're also hoping and looking, I mean, it's like any students who might be interested to take these to other countries, right? Other political institutional settings, right? Other moments in history. We ourselves are trying to get access to the disaggregated census data through the research data centers that the census has. There's one at Texas A&M. Carl, you have one very close to you at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, right? I mean, it's like they have access. So you have to, I mean, it's a long process to get approval, but if you get approval, they let you go to the micro level data, right? You have to do the analysis in-house, and that would allow us, I mean, it's like to estimate more weights and do more flexibility on that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so let's see, we have more students here in US posing a question or raising a hand. And we have Gil here, Giuseppe, and also one of our PhD candidates. Do you like to speak up, Giuseppe?
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, great.
Yes.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, I have just a couple questions. Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm a big fan of the models and quite familiar with the background as well. So first, basically your model is based on a post-China shock situation, right? Where in terms of exporters versus importers and manufacturing background, in the US, you have that level of shifts in terms of sectors that are influencing at the local level, right? So do you believe that this will change if you look at the more recent interests in terms of sectorial lobbying, given the power that, like, for example, certain sectors like tech have at the national level? So that will be for the first question based on your expectation and given the model. For the second one will be, how does this play out if we had to consider basically a more recent, let's say in the last 20-year situation where tariff levels are actually can never be as local manufacturers want, just for a reason that we have so many more preferential trade agreements that set tariff levels that are way below what that basically MFN will give us. So these kind of revealed preferences are like blocked by these block level tariff levels that are set almost as the global level, but for the US in particular, they are much lower than they should be, basically. So how does that play out in such an empirical model? Of course, it's the extension of the 1994 model that you present, but that presents a whole lot of more challenges, right? So
those are fabulous questions. So let me connect them, because that's how we came about. I mean, it's thinking about the exporters in our model as an extension, right? So since the Tokyo and Uruguay round, I mean, it's right, you had these constraints that you mentioned, right? I mean, it's really hard. I mean, it's to pretty much the tariff structure, I mean, it's that we observe today. It's a successor of the Tokyo and Uruguay rounds. I mean, it's of GATT. I mean, right? But I mean, the reason why we went to 2002 to do this estimation is because even if the tariff level that were determined when China did not have access to, I mean, it's right? It's to the US market were optimal. Once you open that flat gate, I mean, it's then the level of protection that those tariffs give you, right? It's are no longer optimal. Now, the US could have decided not to let China into the US market, right? And in fact, there were discussions in 2000, 2001, and before that, China, since 1994, had these, I mean, it's annual, I mean, it's revision on whether they would be eligible to access some of the conditions, I mean, it's for entering the US, right? Due to, I mean, it's the post Tiananmen Square, I mean, it's and human rights violations. This is something that Clinton started, right? So the point we're making is even if the tariffs were set, they are no longer, I mean, it's politically optimal, right? Once your M changes dramatically, right? I mean, it's because so that's the first step. I mean, it's for our analysis, right? I mean, it's so now the coalition has to decide whether or not to keep that level of protection that it did before. Right? I mean, and that's why we think it's consequential in that regard. So the point we're trying to make is that the institutions in the US, I mean, it's could somehow anticipate the impact of the China shock, and they did not prevent it, right? Why? Because it was politically expedient for a majority, where exporters were very influential because they worried that restricting access to China into the US market would keep them from accessing the Chinese market for themselves. So that's kind of the idea. So that setup is implicit here, right? And that's why we added the exporters and reciprocity in terms of trade and so on into the model. I mean, precisely to respond to these types of concerns, right? But now let's think about through reciprocity, and brings to the second question that you have, and some things of the extensions that we want. So we're saying that the tariff remains low in the US, not solely because, I mean, it's hard for any specific factors owners, right, to get their way, right? Because even if they were lobbying, they would be counter lobbying, I mean, and so on. But because exporters are influential, right? Now, zoom into 2017. At that point, Trump decided that the exporters, I mean, access to the Chinese market did not matter anymore, right? Okay, China, you can retaliate as much as you want. I mean, I'm willing to cater to my constituents. So at that point, I mean, what we say is those commitments that we had, I mean, right, were no longer binding for me because I could push away exporters, right? Those who wanted to access China, right? I mean, and cater to those import competing industries in steel and other areas and so on. Whether this was good or bad is a different story. I mean, I'm not making any judgment. The idea is, I say, at some point that happened, but that's going forward. Let's go backwards, right? Let's go to 1931 and 1934, right? In 1931, I mean, it's tariffs were not set reciprocally, right? So you get Smoot-Hawley, tariffs through the roof, right? I mean, right? You get a coalition, right? I mean, it's that law rolls into a high tariff protection. I mean, it's in response to the Great Repression and the, I mean, bigger than neighbor type of policies. 3 years after that, you get RTAA, right? Empowering exporters, right? I mean, it's and making exporters, I mean, it's enter into the calculus, right, of the coalition that had to enact these policies. These are the next steps we want to take these to the data, right? I mean, it's what are the weights that are reflected in the tariff wars in 2017 and 2019? What are the different welfare weights that we can estimate in 1931 on 1934. For that, I mean, it might be an issue of data, but maybe we can do it at the state level. But these points are, I mean, it's like well taken, I mean, and very clear, and it's precisely what motivates us to keep pushing the agenda in these different directions. Hopefully, I answered your question.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Gil, for the question. I feel really bad. We do not have more time to accommodate more questions, and maybe we will get more motivated to invite you back and in future for another talk. And before we wrap up, maybe we can introduce Dr. Pan, and who can give us a more concluded maybe on a colloquium, and give a concluding remark, particularly about the upcoming webinars. Yeah, please, Peter. Briefly,
Okay,
1 minute.
Yeah, 1 minute. Because right, I just want to thank you, and if for the first time, for those of you who are first time here, and this colloquium, actually, this is supported by two universities. One is the NCSU, National Chongqing University in Taiwan, and then UT Dallas. So please, you're welcome to check on our website, which is dacolloquium.com. And then you can check and then see the previous speakers there. And then we keep the flyers there. And also, I want to make announcements or some promotion for the next webinar, which will be delivered by Jared Egerton, Professor Egerton. And then he's from UTD at Dallas, and that's Carl's colleagues too. And then can I share this screen for real quick, Carl? It's okay. How about just unlimited, because of time limits, because it's over 12 o'clock here and over 11 o'clock there. So just check our website, and then do come back next week for the topics of networked cooperation of similar state. It's about the cooperative communities in the international system. So I think there will be a fun topic, and then there will be great insights. So you can check back, and please register so you can receive the updated news. So I want to thank you all for coming today, and we hope that this webinar can bring you more insights in the coming few webinars. Okay, Carl. You mute yourself.
Sorry. And okay, quick. And I posted the website and also our YouTube channel, and also the link to register for next week's webinar. And I think, yeah, I need to stop here. And I want to say thank you again to Dr. Pinto, and that this is really just a really wonderful webinar and a great research. You can keep it on applause and virtually. You can do it on the raise here side.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you so much, Pablo. This is really wonderful.
Thank you so much.
And,
thank you, Peter.
yeah.
Thank you, Carl. This was fabulous, and thank you for the great comments and questions. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
All right. Then I will. All right. And look forward to seeing you next week. And so hopefully we can cross paths soon, and Pebble, and whether it is in a national conference or maybe in a Methods conference. We would like to. Every time I see you, I learn a lot and a great deal, great opportunities. And
we'll have you for TechSmith in February. I will save the date soon. So TechSmith is going to be in Houston. Yep. So.
Oh, that would be wonderful. That will be next February. Okay, then I'll see you then. Yep.
Peter, hopefully we can get you over at some point. It's like, thank you so much.
Yeah, we need to bring him to Taiwan.
Yeah, that's right.
All right.
Yeah, that's what I'm about to say. Yeah, I hope that I have the opportunity to invite you here.
I would love that. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, thank you all. Have a good night to the U.S. participants, and have a good day for the rest of the day in Taiwan, Taichung.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Good night, Peppo.
Good night. All right.